Okay, ready?
I'm ready.
Ready? All right. Welcome to the Lalo Dagach podcast. I'm here with an activist from Libya. He was in Libya during the Arab Spring and the fall of Gaddafi, and he's here to tell me more about himself and Libya. I'm here with Bilal. Thank you for coming on, Bilal.
Thank you, Lalo, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem, man. So I want to hear a lot from you. So let's start like way at the beginning. Tell me about where you were born, your upbringing. Let's start from there.
Yeah, I was born in Benghazi. I was born in Libya. I was born in the 90s. So I was born during the time where there's international sanctions on Libya. It's a result of Gaddafi's actions. They accused him of bringing down a plane on Lockerbie, Scotland. And that's when Americans decided to set like international sanctions on the Gaddafi regime. And when I grew up, like early on, I noticed immediately that there was something different about my family in Libya. That I grew up with an uncle who was part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and as soon as I grew up, he was out of the country, and when I was 6 years old, and that put a target on our back as his family. Like when the Gaddafi regimes in Libya or Arab majority countries, when they want to punish you, they don't just punish you. They also punish your relatives, your family. So there was an extra pressure where, like, I felt that there was a political witch hunt against my family.
Can I ask you there how would they punish like you and your extended family? Not you specifically, but you're saying in general in the country. Like
first of all,
what methods would they use to punish?
You wouldn't be able to get any high positions in the government. Like that's one of the first things you do, and you get. I remember like the police coming to our house and questioning us, like not me, but my family, multiple times about whereabouts my uncle, and it wasn't even a conspiracy that we also heard like our phone being monitored. So it wasn't like it was a common thing. It was a security state. It was a small country, and Gaddafi was crushing down on his opposition, both Islamist and secular opposition. And I immediately noticed that my family was part of not the opposition, but was not the favorable families by the regime. And the city I was in, Benghazi, was not favored by the regime itself.
So, you know, what you said there about Libya being a rather small country, I was kind of surprised when I was looking up some research on Libya that when Gaddafi took power, there was only about 2 million people in the country. I think this is the 1960s. And even today, there's only 6.5 million or something million people in Libya. That's a pretty small country, and I say this even from Chile, where we're like 17 million people. So
Libya is I think 1/70th in the population and worldwide, and the 17th largest country in the world. Like now maybe 16th after the Sudan's split. But yeah, it's a very large country with a very, very small population and a huge amount of oil reserves. So it's very perfect, like for economic growth, for economic opportunity, like a great location. As you know now, with the international migrant crisis, it's close to Europe. It's in Africa, so it's a gateway to Europe and to Africa itself. So it can be a gate, like as you can see it now, and it has a lot of opportunities, both economically and socially, because it's not a very diverse country, although there is a little bit of diversity. But yeah, it's a very like ready to be rich country, but unfortunately it has other plagues in it.
So Libya is kind of a good example of a place that really has every opportunity to grow and have a wealthy population And
Hmm.
because like all the conditions are there, there's natural resources, there's sea, there's proximity to Europe, there's a relatively small population. It's just governmental organization that's lacking, really.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
like I'll give you a short history of Libya. Libya was in the last maybe up until 1900, it was occupied by the Ottomans, Turkey,
Mm-hmm.
and it was under the Ottoman Caliphate, the Islamic Ottoman Caliphate, and it was very, very neglected under that Caliphate. Libyans has have back then it wasn't just Libya; it was three states, but like Libyans in general were revolting against the Turks, and there was a lot of uh, like how can I say it? Anger towards the Turks, especially when the Italians came to Libya and Libyans signaled to Turkey like, "Hey, you're supposed to defend us. We're part of the Ottoman Empire." And there was little resistance from Turkey to the Italian occupation. And as you know, Italy occupied Libya, uh, and unfortunately, in 1911, the Italians came to Libya, and there was like a resistance, and maybe there was like a little bit of history between the two countries. So there was a not a welcoming feel, but people in the big cities were okay with the Italians because they were really pissed off with the Turks. And but in 1920, it kind of went really unfortunate because Italy itself became a fascist state, and it was under Mussolini. So that hasn't had like reflected really badly on occupation on Libya, and there was a pretty big difference after the fascism, and there isn't even massacres. There's even detention camps, and yeah, it was like really bad back then. So then came World War II, and Italy was kicked out of Libya, and Britain took over. That's when, like, even me studying law, that's when Libya actually started to show a little bit of development. England brought even like Supreme Court justices were British. They weren't Libyan because Libya had no judges. Most of the school teachers were Brits, and most of the government was run by British officials. And it wasn't like an occupation. It was like an administrative like it was like a most administrative stuff. They weren't like taking the country.
So wait, to
But
describe what you're talking about, like, so is there after, well, before World War II, it was occupied under
yeah,
a very
Italy,
vicious Italian
Italian
rule, but then
fascist. Yeah,
after
it's a
fascist
fascist. Yeah,
rule, and then there was an
unfortunately. Yeah.
uprising, partly led by Omar Mukhtar,
It,
right, and
it's
things like
not
that.
the. It's not the. This is a historical story that Gaddafi chose to tell about Libya. It's not that Omar Mukhtar actually that
Oh, really?
any it. He did lead a resistance, and it was very strong. But he was captured and he was killed. And there is a little bit of controversy because Omar Mukhtar is also fighting in the south,
Hmm.
in not in Libya, in Chad. He was fighting France, and he was a little bit of an extremist. And that's my personal opinion, by the way. That's not even, but yeah, but there's like a historical documents that Libyans weren't 100% with him because the Sunusi family, which is later become the monarchy, were with negotiation with Italians and were with the occupation. And Omar Mukhtar was like, no, this is jihad. We need to fight them until death. And people were like, but we can't. Italy's a world power, and Libya is barely a village. Like what you're talking about, we're villagers. We're just farmers. We want to survive, and we want to make a deal. And there was a little bit of religious talk. He was an imam. He was a Quran teacher. So he's one of the original jihadis.
Okay. Well, and then after World War II, I think what you were getting at is that
Yeah,
many
it was
countries
the
were
Allies.
under
Yeah.
Allied administration, and from what I understand,
Exactly.
Libya was partly administrated by Britain and part by France, but
In part,
it wasn't that wasn't colonization. They weren't in charge of the country, but there was
yes,
some
exactly.
administrative rule until
And there was
eventually
even,
they
yeah,
left.
they were trying to like hype up the monarchy,
Hmm.
which was was allied to the allies, which is what, yeah, close to the allies. But they were trying to set up a monarchy, and it was successful. In 1951, Libya was a monarchy now, a constitutional monarchy. And with the good and the bad, the monarchy was, now it's like everybody is praising it and they're thinking of the nice stuff, but it was a really good time in Libya's history. But unfortunately, during the 1950s, there was another leader, a very heavily influential leader called Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. He was an Arabist leader, and he took over Egypt with a revolution and against a monarchy. And Libya and Egypt are historically very tied to each other, very close to each other. Um, uh, like Libyans won't like to admit this, but Egypt is a big sister of Libya. Whatever Egypt does, Libyans usually follow, and it's very, like, our culture is very heavily influenced. It's one of the most ancient civilization on earth. How can you not be influenced? So most of the Libyan teachers in the 1950s were Egyptian, and most of them were actually, not most of them. Uh, Jamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian leader, actually hired a lot of spies to go to Libya and to spread both communism and Arabism, to substitute for monarchy, which was taken over in Libya, which was successful in Libya a little bit. By the 1960s, late 1960s, people were like, even knew and had a feeling that a military coup, like Egyptian style by an Arabist, was gonna come eventually, and they were like, they were wanted it, they expected it, because they wanted more out of their monarchy to fight Israel and to do more about Arabist issues, but the monarchy was not involved. Like, as you know, monarchies like to be stable and like to be in power, not create a lot of hostilities internationally. So Gaddafi took over in 1969. It wasn't a bloody coup. It wasn't like a very heavily like bloody coup. It was just a coup, like a military quick coup. Um, Not a lot of executions. People were happy. There were like mostly protests and support, not a lot of resentment against Gaddafi. And yeah, and I remember my father telling me like that they were happy about the Gaddafi coup, that they were waiting for a young leader, a military leader, to take over and to do exactly what Jamal Abdel Nasser did. And Jamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian leader, supported Gaddafi and backed him. So
Hmm.
yeah, Gaddafi took power in 1969. Back then, Libya had, other than the monarchy, there were no strong parties or political infrastructure like that can go against Gaddafi. So that's the only thing that helped him. That he took over the monarchy, and then he took over all over the country, like the judicial, the parliament. There was no opposition to him. So unfortunately, Gaddafi did. In the beginning of the first few years, people praised him and he was good. In 1977, when he started the communist agenda and he started the Arabist, his own vision of Arabism and communism, that's when he started. There was a lot of hanging, human rights abuses, discrimination against. He started a tribal war. Like he started like systematically destroying everything that can set an opposition to him. And unfortunately, by 1980s, the only opposition he had now was either secular, Libyans descended who were living abroad, or Islamists who are now becoming a part of the Muslim Brotherhood, which came to Libya and in the 50s, but quietly grew in the 60s and 70s, but in the 80s, that's when the Muslim Brotherhood influenced a lot of Libyans, especially through Libyan students abroad in the United States and in Canada and other countries in the 60s and in the 80s, especially. They brainwashed a lot of students, especially including my uncle, including like my relatives that I knew in the United States. And yeah, they came back as an opposition to Gaddafi. Some of them were armed, some of them were peaceful. My uncle was peaceful, and yeah, that's when they started arresting them.
Can I tell you like my research and my reading of Gaddafi and see what you think? From what I could tell, like going through those decades of like 70s, 80s, and 90s of Gaddafi, it seems like he was the most bipolar leader I've ever seen. He experimented with pretty much every ideology there was, from pan-Arabism to he first experimented with being a very Islamic state, then a rather secular state. He became extremely socialist state, then a very capitalist state. He even made up his own political philosophy drawn out in the Green Book. It seems like he was all over the map when it comes to how to administrate a country. And there was many testimonies I could find of people in Libya or politicians outside of Libya saying that he was a very unstable person. Even not both his politics and even in person. It's the most all over the map kind of political scheming I've ever seen of a country during those decades. Am I pretty much right in saying that there was a lot of changes?
You are. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of changes. We in Libya, we got used to not in social or security, nothing changes, but politically, things changed drastically every 5-10 years. It was strange how Libya transformed from a total, I remember it like myself. I was born in 1990, and I remember it myself, how it was a total communist state where we had lines for food, where we had to buy food from line, and where there was shortages. And I remember there were fruits that we didn't have in Libya until I grew up later. We didn't have bananas in Libya until I was 7 years old. Or a lot of basic things, when there was a lot of sanctions, international sanctions, we couldn't have any American goods or any international goods. So you can we didn't have a Pepsi Cola, for example. We never saw it before. So it was strange for us. And Gaddafi was experimenting with a lot of things. Personally, I can tell you about him. His life was very eccentric. There's a lot of lies and there is a lot of rumors about his life, but I can confirm that people around him can say that he was a drug addict and he was a drug abuser, especially painkillers, and he wasn't under control with his drug habit. Mm-hmm. So that's something that can indicate you. And he had a really rough childhood.
He was a Bedouin, no? A kind of nomadic tribe in Libya.
He was a Bedouin, and he worked when he was a young boy. He worked as a sheep herder, and sometimes he would go. As a young boy, this is a legendary story about him, that they would go and serve during weddings or social events, that he would serve tea or to elders of other tribes, not his own tribe, and they would be asking him about where he's from and his tribe, and they would mock him because he was from a small tribe, and he wasn't a very educated person from a senior family or whatever. But so he actually educated himself, and he went to a bigger city, and he started to learn about philosophy, about history, about. He was a very well-educated, self-educated person, and his personal tutor, not personal tutor, one of his most influential school teachers in Benghazi was an Egyptian. And that same person was also teaching my dad, and he was bringing my dad to his home, teaching him about pan-Arabism and socialism and communism and history, from like a very narrow like Arabist point of view. Yeah, a lot of anti-Israel stuff, and that same person was also Gaddafi's teacher.
Yeah, so
Like
people
the
understand
same person.
pan-Arabism. Gaddafi also, from what I've read, that Gaddafi very much admired Nasser, wanted to unite with Nasser to create unification between the Arab states. This is different from, if people don't understand the difference. There was a lot of competing philosophies about how the Middle East and the Muslim world should unite, and
Exactly.
by uniting become stronger and compete with the West. And there was a lot of
Hmm.
differences as to what the group should be. So pan-Arabism was the idea that all Arabs should unite.
Exactly.
There's also a pan-Islamic Arab ideology where all the Arabs who are Muslims should unite, and then there's just
Exactly.
pan-Islamic unification, where
Which is a caliphate. Yeah.
all the Muslim countries unite. So this would include non-Arab states such as Iran and
Malaysia.
Pakistan and Indonesia and countries like that. So you would get a much more distant countries uniting. But from what I understand, Gaddafi was very much of the idea of pan-Arabism.
Exactly, and
Mm-hmm.
he was a big supporter of that idea. But there's a lot of controversy about like who's exactly Arab. Is Libya
Right.
Arab? Because Libya is North African, and there's a lot of people who speak actually like another language that's not Arab, and the only connection they have to the rest of the Arab world, quote unquote, it's that they have the same religion. They share the religion, and even the religion is kind of different in Libya. Libya is not as religious as Saudi Arabia, and as Saudi Arabia is not as religious as Iraq, for example. So there's a lot of differences. So like the pan thing never worked, and until Gaddafi gave up and he started the Pan African thing, where he
Mm-hmm.
tried to become the king of kings of Africa and unite all of Africa. And that's serious. Like he really went for it. Like everything in Libya was becoming more African and not Arab.
Right. Can we go back to your backgrounds? I want to hear more about your upbringing. So, were you brought up in a religious family at all? If so, what religion, or were they more secular? What was your upbringing like?
No, my upbringing was moderate. I would say it wasn't like a secular. It wasn't. It was religious, but not like oppressive or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like you can think for yourself, but we are really
Hold on.
want to
You
think, but
wait, hold on. You said we are what?
we're like liberal, like we can think for ourselves. Like
Mm-hmm.
my father wasn't oppressive, like you have to think the same way I have to think, but we also knew that our family was leaning towards the Islamist side because of my uncle. And like back then all of Libya had this idea that opposition to Gaddafi should be Islamist or whatever, like if you're against Gaddafi, that means you're an Islamist. So people couldn't tell the difference being against Gaddafi, because the only people who were speaking up against Gaddafi or talking about him was the Islamist.
Mm-hmm.
So people were like, okay, if you're against Gaddafi, that means you're an Islamist. But that's not true. Anyway, my family wasn't like oppressive, but I grew up in a religious like environment, like you can say that. I became a lawyer, and I uh, like there's nothing interesting in the early years of my life except that when 2006 came, like the year before I got into law school, uh, Libya had saw as in 2006 have seen a demonstration in February 11th against the cartoons that were drawn of Prophet Muhammad, and in Benghazi they burned the Italian consulate because they believed that there was a minister in Italy wore a T-shirt with the cartoon on it, and that's why they burned the Italian embassy. But while they were burning the consulate, there were chants against Gaddafi as well in 2006. And in Benghazi, there was a small, like a growing sentiment that this is a revolution against Gaddafi, not a protest against the cartoon anymore. And within 3 days, Gaddafi was able to suppress everything, but it felt like this is the closest thing to a revolution that can happen, which was on February 11th. But I'm sorry to jump back a little bit.
Can
I told
also
you that,
when you jump back, can you? I mean, you say there's not a lot of interesting things in your background, but I think almost anything would be interesting for.
yeah. I'm gonna give you something in the 90s. Yeah, where I grew up.
I would like to know also if you can include in there how religious is the atmosphere around the country, because people have their prejudices about Muslim countries, and in the 90s Libya, I'm not really sure, considering how erratic Gaddafi was, about what really the country looked like, what was permissible.
Okay.
Can you just give me an idea of what daily life was like a little bit there?
Okay. In Libya, before I came in the 70s, Libya was more like Iran and more like Egypt. It was a secular state. It wasn't religious. Women didn't wear hijab. Hijab was really rare, and there wasn't much of public like practicing religion. But in 1980s, that's when Saudi Arabia started to spread Wahhabism, and they started to spread more religious idea. That's when most women in Libya started wearing hijab. By the time I grew up in the 90s, that's when 50-50 of women, like, or 60-40 of women were wearing hijab, and the rest were not wearing hijab. By 2001, all of the women in Libya were wearing hijab. Hijab was the main thing. Like, it would be rare to see a woman not wearing hijab. So it was strange to grow up in a country that's regressing into religion as you grew up. Yeah, but yeah, in the 90s Libya was more secular a little bit, but in the 2000s Libya was becoming more religious and ultra conservative.
Was there any influence from Saudi Arabia to explain that was happening?
Yeah, the Wahhabist mosques, Wahhabi Salafi imams, all that was influential by Saudi Arabia. The mosques in Libya, especially, and I can also blame Gaddafi for a little bit of that, which is in the 1980s. He actually set up some people to go to Afghanistan and to join fighting with Bin Laden and to join the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union back then.
Mm-hmm.
Not because he was against the Soviet Union, but it was a way to get rid of his opposition, to go to jihad. Like, hey guys, you can go there, like you can fight there. In the 1990s, that's when they came back to Libya. And some of them were coming back a lot of them were coming back from Afghanistan, and they were like prepared now to fight Gaddafi. And they gave him a really big battle, and it was a really long war. And it started in 1994, it ended in 1996. Gaddafi had used every imaginable weapon under him to bomb the mountains like near Benghazi and Derna. And it was a big war. And I remember like one time in my house where like security dogs came and like looked through our things, like in our house, like multiple times actually, to see if we were hiding somebody in our house, because they were looking everywhere for people who were hiding, and they would call them terrorists. That was the first time I ever heard like the word Zindiq, which is a terrorist in Libya.
Mm.
Yeah. So I was 6 years old, like back then. But in 1996, Gaddafi had already put almost most of them in jail. Like he had a big jail called Abu Slim prison, and in that jail he had Muslim Brotherhood, he had jihadi people, and he had secular like anti-Gaddafi people, or people who are just opposition, like people like were going to jail for anything, like with the family. He even held like people in prison for political charges for things they did to him while he was a kid. So he had a lot of enemies. But in 1996, those people were in a prison that's their human rights were being abused, and they were asking for a fair trial, and they were asking for like any rights. And in 1996, they killed in the same prison, like they massacred 1,200 people within 2 hours. And in the following years, we started to hear about it, but what drove people crazy was their families were trying to visit them, and the Gaddafi regime told them they're alive. You can visit them anytime, but you can't see them, because they're alive. You can leave things for them, you can leave whatever, but they're alive. Don't worry about it. Little by little, the following years, the story was coming out. Witnesses were confessing that this massacre took place and people were dead. And the Gaddafi government, after 5 years, they were telling people, like, one by one, like, hey, your son died of disease or whatever. So the family of those people were protesting, like, regularly against, like, for justice to their kids, which is, like, one of the few things where you can see, like, a very peaceful protest asking for a trial. These two things coincided in 2011, where the families of the people who were massacred in 1996, the Muslim, their lawyer now has set up a case against the prison, and there were protests for the anniversary for the 2006 protests I told you about, February 11, 2006 protests. And at the same time, Tunisia and Egypt just had their revolution, Arab Spring Revolution. So these three things coincided in February in Libya, where like Gaddafi had imprisoned the lawyer for the Muslim families. The Arab Spring was coming, and the anniversary of the February 17th protest was taking over. That was like the perfect mix for Benghazi to start the revolution. And I was there back then, and it was one of the strangest things, like you can see, because we were living in a safe, secure suburb in Benghazi. And when I say safe and secure, Libya was one of the safest countries maybe in the world. Gaddafi had a secure state under him. The police were very strong. The government, the army was very strong. So even though there is a lot of crime, by 2010, by 2011, Libya was as safe as it can get. And within the last few years, Gaddafi had set up connections with the United States, and he gave up the nuclear program.
A lot of people don't know that when you say that, a lot of, because that was kind of my my main subject when I was studying politics, is nuclear proliferation. A lot of people are very unaware of the fact that Gaddafi in Libya had a nuclear program, and he gave it up after 9/11, contacting Britain and the United States in exchange for the lifting of sanctions to have trade with the rest of the world. Yeah. And it was lifted by the United States, their unilateral embargo in 2004. But I think to this day, most people are even unaware that Libya had a nuclear weapons program.
Most Libyans don't know that in themselves. Like, Libyans themselves still question whether we had it for real or not. Whether like a Gaddafi threat, but we did. Like, yeah,
we had uranium. The United States found the centrifuges, so that he was using to make the lightweight uranium. Yeah. Definitely had it. Yeah,
he had scientists from Pakistan. Yeah,
when Gaddafi contacted Tony Blair, for Tony Blair to contact Bush to say they're willing to give up the nuclear program in exchange for lifting the sanctions, Tony Blair and George Bush, their reaction was, what the hell? They have a nuclear program? They didn't even know. Yeah. They didn't even know. That was the funniest part about it. It was a total shock to them.
Yeah. And
that was the first time they'd heard of it.
And that's when Libyans themselves were shocked, like, how could this be? We have a nuclear program? But yeah, that's how Gaddafi spent his time and money.
So after the lifting of those sanctions in 2004, and the money started coming in, did it improve the life of the people of Libya, or just Gaddafi?
Oh yeah, it improved, and I can say, like,
it improved Libya in general.
2001, in 2001 things were improving tremendously in Libya. Gaddafi himself relaxed the political pressure on Libyans. There were more like TV, newspapers, TV channels, plays were more critical of the situation in Libya. There was definitely more freedom and of course a lot of more money and business in Libya, and especially international companies were coming in and investments, and yeah, things were getting a lot better. But at the same time, I remember this being like very stark, that being poor in Libya in the 90s and being rich was not very different. But being poor in 2005 or 2006 was very different from being rich in 2005, 2006. There was like this new class that appeared in Libya, which wasn't there. Libya was mostly a socialist state, and this new class of uh, rich people and like fancy new homes, like expensive cars. It was, you can see, and poor people were like very poor. Like I grew up in Benghazi, and I grew up in a neighborhood that's mostly an immigrant neighborhood from Africa, and most of those immigrants are people who are like Libyans because they've been there for 20, 30 years now, and they're still being called immigrants. So now they have like a second generation of Libyans who are not Libyans, even Syrians and Palestinians or whatever. And I grew up around that, and they were like, you can see the desperation where like, I'm poor and I'm not getting out of this. Like, there's like no hope for me. So there's like this sense of desperation in young people. And I saw it, and I was remembering like, this is really bad, because a person with no hope is very dangerous.
I know exactly what you mean. This is something that it's for a lot of people, maybe in first world Western countries, kind of hard to understand. But what I summarize it as being is it's easier to be poor in a poor country than it is to be poor in a rich country. So, for example, it's easier to be poor in Bolivia, where something like close to the 80% of the population live below the poverty line, because most things around you are made for poor people, right? The prices are adjusted to them because they are the majority.
Exactly.
But if you lived in Japan and you were poor in a country where everything's very expensive and most people have a decent income, to be poor there is very complex. And what happens, for example, in Japan, when a person loses their job, they commit suicide because they can't even feed their family. So it's in some ways it's much harder to be poor in Japan than it is to be poor in a poor country. So,
and it was becoming increasingly impossible to become poor in Libya. Yeah,
right. So there's a downside to the improvements of all the business and capitalism coming into.
And unfortunately, Gaddafi had set up a socialist state where there, I don't know, like a percentage, but it's up to 70% of people are working in the public sector. So most of the people are relying on government salaries, and little by little, like there weren't enough, like there weren't living wages anymore. So you can see that it was like boiling, and it wasn't sustainable anymore. Like the country had to change soon, or else like it was gonna explode. That's when Gaddafi's son came in, and he set up like the Libya Tomorrow plan, which is like a way to transfer Libya into a new modern era, which is what the Saudi Arabia is doing right now. But unfortunately, he failed, because the old guard, the Gaddafi and people, like the people around his father, they fought him, and the son actually gave up. Like he didn't believe enough in the project himself. Like, so he gave up like the 2 years before the revolution. And that was like, that project with Gaddafi's son, it was mostly led by the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way.
Why is that?
Because he was close to an imam. So, okay, a quick story. Remember the Abu Slim prison? Gaddafi wanted to release the people in the prison because there were like thousands left, and they were mostly his opposition, and their families were like, hey, it's been 20 years now, can you release our kids? And he started releasing them, but he he didn't release them easily. He brought up Muslim Brotherhood sheikhs and imams, and he started this rehabilitation program where jihadis would be turned to Muslim Brotherhood or turned to be like peaceful Salafis. You know, he brought sheikhs and imams from Saudi Arabia and other countries to rehabilitate those jihadis. And the jihadis.
This sounds like a terrible idea.
Yeah. I'll tell you why. Yeah. These jihadis actually started to write books about how they renounced their old ideas and how they now are peaceful Islamists. Which, yeah, like in 2011, those people got united and became the Islamist front against Gaddafi. Yeah, and they were connected like directly to Qatar and like other countries. But let's not jump ahead of ourselves.
Can I ask you about 2011?
Yeah.
Because I was studying, getting my master's in politics during that time. So I was in the thick of like, you know, classes during the Arab Spring, and there was an explosion. There was kind of this exploding movement in Libya, and then I hear Gaddafi talking about cities like Misrata and Benghazi, that he's referring to the rebels there as rats that he's going to exterminate, and he's sending troops there. And then Obama gives a speech where he says, we're drawing a red line. There's conditions that with I believe NATO that they've established that you have to meet certain conditions. If not, we are going to stop you. No boots on the ground, but they would, you know, there will be bombings against the military. And there was a lot of people against any intervention by the United States that but hearing Gaddafi speak so explicitly that he's just going to basically commit a genocide against his own people who are against him, and seeing, I saw so many images of Libyans on rooftops with images and banners and signs saying, you know, NATO, please intervene, you know, something to that effect. You know, what is your take? Like, what happened in that moment? Do you think the United States was right to intervene? Did it help? Was it the right thing to do at the moment, even if it resulted later in all the aftermath? But in the moment, what do you think about it?
Okay, in the moment. So in 2011, that was the second time within 5 years, Benghazi has started a revolution against Gaddafi. So Gaddafi was like, okay. In 2006, he sent a delegation to Benghazi, like chiefs and elders and like tribe elders, and telling them like, I have no issue with leveling Benghazi, like, because I'm gonna destroy it in like 24 hours. Like, if you don't stop this, I'm just gonna bomb the city to the ground. And he was showing them pictures of convoys coming to Benghazi to wreck it. And he even, this is not a secret, he even had a plan, an emergency plan to destroy Benghazi in case anything happens, because this is like something that's been happening regularly. Not regularly, this is the second time, but he had signs that this is going to happen to him eventually.
Oh, so you mean he had pre-planned the destruction of Benghazi even before the uprising, because in case this might happen? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in 2011, when that happened, he actually sent his son to say the same exact thing. Like, he sent his own son to Benghazi, and his son he was giving the speech where he said, like, guys, you either have two choices. We can invest 200 billion in the city within the next 10 years, or we can level it. Like, we can have the power to do that. So in February, in March, that's when the Gaddafi plan he set up to destroy the city, he was actually on his way to do it and to apply it. And within the first hour, he actually entered the city in March 17th. March 19th. Yeah, March 19th. It's a Saturday. He entered the city, and within the first hour, 92 people died. But fortunately, the Americans interfered, and that very day that they bombed and stopped him from destroying Benghazi, my life was on the line that day. So they literally saved millions within a day. Like I can tell you that Benghazi is not like Homs or whatever, like a Syrian city that's under the Syrian regime but rejects him. It would been look like that, and it would have been like terrible. But yeah, that day, Americans and the French and NATO, the alliance, yeah, they did good. Yeah, that day, I actually support that intervention. Of course, when you say that, a lot of people think that you support what happened after the intervention and the lack of anything that Obama had. He had no plan for Libya or the like Arab Spring in general. Like the Obama administration was taken by surprise by it, unfortunately.
Can I give you my opinion on the bad decisions in the United States?
Sure.
You know something, and you I think you know quite a bit about like the Arab region and all of this. I find when people say, well, when America intervenes, things go sideways, things go bad in this region. I find that from everything I can read, in the last few decades in any Middle Eastern country, if the United States does something good or bad, it ends up bad. If the United States does nothing, it goes bad. If it just kind of supports in name or slightly any group, it goes bad because there's just too much division in these countries.
It's not their fault though. That's when I can I'm one of the people who was really hard on Libyans, because I always say, like, as much as we can blame Gaddafi or blame the United States or blame Saudi Arabia, we need to look at ourselves and say, why does this keep happening to us? What are we doing wrong? Where is the repeated bad pattern? And the United States, as much as people want to make it seem like an evil power, is actually trying to do its best while they're doing it. But unfortunately, the region itself is set up for that. It's prepared for that. It's like they can't do anything that's going to be right. Americans, they can limit the damage, but they can't do anything that's be right. There is a pattern there. And that's what's same with Libyans. I always say that Gaddafi is not a dictator who came out of nowhere. He's a reflection of what we want, of what Libyans want. They want a strong military man who speaks up to the world and who's not afraid, who won't back down, and who's Islamic enough and whatever. But they got what they hope for. And
it sounds like America presently, except for the Islamic part.
Exactly. Right? It's like what you manifested that, and you created him, and then he became real. And it's like I'm gonna jump to 2018, and the same thing happening with this current military leader in Libya. Libya was in the last few years was going in a civil war. And it's a civil war. At the same time, there is a war against terrorist groups like Islamic State and Al Qaeda, and it was like the remainder of Gaddafi's army and the people who are not Islamist and fighting the Islamists. And now that the army has won, the leader of that army, the guy who's left behind, is literally a Gaddafi 2.0, and people love him. People are like, "We want you," and the guy was like part of the revolution a few years ago. But unfortunately, they wanted a Gaddafi 2.0 because they just want that type of personality. They don't have enough to say, like, to Islamists, we don't like your ideas, we can fight you, and we can reject your Islamic bullshit. They can't. They're too afraid. They're too shy to say that. They're just gonna be okay with a military guy who's gonna say, I'm going to kill the Islamists, and I'm going to set up like a light Islamic state. That's going to satisfy you. Yeah.
So after that intervention in 2011, which subsequently led to Gaddafi going into hiding, and then they caught him, and then Libyan citizens killed him, and then they attempted to build a new state with not the kind of intervention that Iraq faced after the war. For example, the United States was less involved. What was that time like in Libya?
Okay, so in 2011, during the revolution, during the middle of the revolution, Libyans started to notice that the rebels fighting in the front lines, they weren't mostly civilian rebels. They were mostly Islamic radical jihadists. They were mostly Islamists who are coming back from the United States, Libyans coming back from the United Kingdom, which now we know with the help of MI6, it's not a conspiracy anymore. They confess that they helped extremist Libyans go back to Libya to fight Gaddafi with the help of the British government.
What's with these Western Muslims being more fundamentalist than the people in the Middle East?
Yeah, so I'll tell you. So they started to come back to Libya, and the Muslim Brotherhood came back to Libya, and we immediately noticed that Qatar was taking over Libyan revolution. They had a Libyan channel, 2 Libyan TV channels. They had the radio channels. They had most of the media, and they controlled the message in Libya. And Qatar was taking over, and that's when there was a resentment towards Qatar started and the Islamists. And in 2011, late 2011, we started to to NATO and to media that we actually have Al Qaeda fighters in the front lines fighting Gaddafi, and we're not okay with them coming back. We started to notice that, but it was we don't know, we're not sure, whatever. And Americans were bombing and NATO was helping, so we're sure that there's probably intelligence watching them. But we later learned that they had even Americans were joking about it. American pilots and UK pilots were joking about they were working for terrorists while they were bombing Gaddafi, because they knew that the people they're fighting down, they were jihadi. After the revolution, those jihadi who came back from Canada and the United States, and mostly United Kingdom, Manchester, United Kingdom, they were getting more and more organized. At the same time, they were separating themselves, where the Islamists who are mostly political were becoming the Muslim Brotherhood and their allies, and the jihadis were becoming the Islamic State and Al Qaeda and Ansar Sharia, different Islamic groups. And that's where I came in 2012. In 2012, I was a senior in law school. I was almost graduating, and I was an Islamist. You can say Muslim, not the Muslim Brotherhood. I wasn't part of the group, but I was ideologically aligned with them.
Oh, really? You were rather fundamentalist Muslim during that time?
Not a fundamentalist, but I was an Islamist. You can say I was an apologist. I was I studied Quran and I studied Sharia. At the same time, I studied law. Mm-hmm. So I know my religion and I know what Islam was about, and not really, but I had an idea, and I was a very strong dependent of Islamist ideas, and that Al Qaeda was not representative of what Islam is, but the Muslim Brotherhood are, and we can have a very modern Islamic state that's a civil state, and Islam is the solution, and the world need to hear about it. And I was I've always been a fan of science, of course. One of my heroes was Carl Sagan, and I was always thinking to myself, I'm gonna meet Carl Sagan one day. I know he died, but I was I wish I could meet him one day and convert him to Islam, because I know that.
Wait, you were into science and you were a fan of Carl Sagan at the same time you wanted to establish a Sharia state?
Not a Sharia state, a Sharia law. I was dependent of a very staunch of Sharia law and Sharia.
How did you reconcile those two things?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of conflict back then, but at the
Mm.
same time, I've always been a nerd. I've always been to science, geology, whatever. I've always been like a big fan of like cosmology, of all that, science in general. And how can I say it? Like in Islam, well, you're growing up there, they tell you this stuff is actually compatible with Islam. Like this stuff is like science. Islam is like tells you to go after science because Islam has its own miracles, scientific miracles. So I was like, okay, I have my back. Like, okay, I guess, like, yeah, Islam is perfect. And of course, you can see the conflicts in the words and like the stuff and the ideas, but with the real word. But they also tell you like, if you ever see any conflict between Islam and science, know just that science will rectify itself and become more Islamic because Islam is true and science is not. And I was like, okay, science can be like, it's not as clear cut as we think, so whatever. But I had a lot of conflict within myself. But I was like a very apologist back then. But I also had a group of friends I grew up with. This group of friends were part of the Boy Scout in Benghazi. And a few years before the revolution, they were actually radicalized by Al Qaeda, an Al Qaeda like a recruitive leader. He recruited like the close friends circle that I had in Boy Scouts. Like he recruited most of them, and I had to struggle with the fact that a lot of my friends were now jihadi, and that led to a lot of debates where like I'm like, no, Islam is not violence, and even the violent part is like very limited, and like it's not like whatever, and it's better than civil law and better than the French law, and it's like, and then they were like, Bilal, what are you talking about? You know your religion, like you studied it. This is the stuff, and this is like how Allah said it. Are you trying to like? Why are you trying to hide the truth? And I was like, okay, hold on. In 2012, I looked at the religion. I was like, they're right. They're kind of right. They're saying all this stuff about violence in Islam, and like they're following it correctly, and I'm not. So I was like, I have a choice. I can either be a hypocrite and say like, no, I'm not gonna focus on religion now. I'm just gonna focus on like promoting anti-jihadism, or I can say like I'm gonna be a jihadi. Of course, that wasn't an option. So I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna talk about religion anymore. I'm just gonna be a civil activist. I'm gonna focus on my law degree and graduating and becoming a lawyer in civil law. But I'm not gonna talk about Islam and Sharia anymore. And in 2012, late 2012, that's when the American ambassador was killed. But people think that was like a separate incident. But what happened was in 2012, after the revolution, and like you said, Benghazi and Libya was stable. We had local elections. We had like a federal election, like Libyan election for the parliament, and things were going good. At the same time, these jihadi groups were spreading and getting stronger and stronger, and they were getting money because they were fighting. They fought against Gaddafi, and the government has set up like funds for people who fought against Gaddafi, the rebels who fought against Gaddafi. So they were making money, and they had weapons, and they were like assassinating. Now they were assassinating either Gaddafi era officers. They were executing people. And they were smart about it. They were choosing people who would, like, at first you would be contradicting yourself. You would be like, this guy's a criminal, but he should deserve like a trial, like a Gaddafi era general. But they would say like, we just handed him justice. We just killed him because Allah said so, and like, we're not gonna hurt anyone that's innocent, but we're just gonna hurt someone like that. So people were like, okay, as long as it's not against me, I'm just going to be silent. At the very beginning, I was one of those people, but it was really quickly to me to say like, oh, these are assassinations, and I'm a lawyer, and I should be against that. And I'm like, the lawyer in me was like, I should be more active as an activist, a civil activist. So I was more honest about jihadism and Islam, and not Islam, leave that aside, about jihadism and about the growing problem in Benghazi. And I was talking to, because I was speaking English, I was talking to the media that was already in Libya, or the media that was covering the 2011 revolution. And I was calling them to say, like this is bad. Benghazi is going in a really bad direction. And they tried to assassinate the British ambassador, and they tried to assassinate the Italian consul, and they tried to then they actually killed the American ambassador. And like, if you don't know about Chris Stevens, the American ambassador, and his three friends, he was the American ambassador during the revolution.
I heard that Chris Stevens, I mean, at least the news reported that he was deeply appreciated and loved by the population. Exactly. Is that true?
So he came in 2011 during the revolution and during really dark times in Benghazi and Libya. And this man was, how can I say it? Like a really decent human being, like a very good man. And you can tell, like, he was really passionate about helping Libyans and like American, like he was the most positive example of American foreign diplomacy I ever seen in my life. Like I can say that with confidence. He was very friendly and very like hopeful. Like he had hope for Libya. Unfortunately, I can't specifically comment on what the policy was, but the people that were around the American embassy, that was literally guarding the embassy, were Islamist militias. Militias that were connected to the Islamist extremists I was talking about, the more jihadis, and they were close to the Americans at one point, through the Muslim Brotherhood, through Libyans who came from Canada and the United States and whatever. These Islamists were more familiar with the Americans than local Libyans like me, you know? So
familiar in what way?
Close, you know? Close, I can say.
That they knew them? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they knew them. At the same time, I'm not sure about how close or whether it was that policy, but I can say that the day before the American ambassador died, few people from the State Department were meeting with militiamen and people from Islamist militias. The people from the Islamist militias, after 4 years later, they were not for 2 years later, they were part of the Ansar Sharia Al Qaeda group. The same people, literally the day before he died, they were meeting in the U.S. consulate building. They burned, and even literally by the end of that meeting, the militiamen turned to them and they were like, "You do know that you're in danger in here, right? That people are coming to kill you." And the American state and the American consul in Benghazi sent for reinforcement and help from the State Department in Washington, and they didn't get that. And that was a big slip up, because one of the worst things that happened was Chris Stevens was in Benghazi during that time where there was a series of attacks and assassinations, and he not announced, but everyone knew that the American ambassador was coming to Benghazi. He organized social events, he invited people, he called people, and he was like, "I'm coming to Benghazi on blah blah blah. I'm coming from Benghazi." So the word really spread around, and I really had a bad feeling about it. That day, not that day, but that visit where I don't think foreign diplomats can go to Benghazi anymore.
Why did the government have this lasso with Islamist groups like Ansar al-Sharia? What was the connection? What did they want from them?
Ansar Sharia was not part of the government, although they were smart about something. Ansar Sharia set itself up outside of the government, and they weren't taking any money from the government. There was just like an independent terrorist group. But their members, all of their members were part of the army and the government. So as individuals, they were part of the government army, but but like on their spare time, they were part of Ansar Sharia, and they were getting salaries from the government.
Aren't those two groups completely opposite and enemies?
Yeah, but yeah.
So you have opposing militias, you have opposing military groups that are
not the military. I'm sorry, the rebels. They call them the revolutionaries. The revolutionary fighters. The government has set up like 2,000 dinars, which is like $1,500 salary, which is a really good salary.
So to explain, I think what you're getting at is, from what I understand, is that you would find, very generally, although you could find more subdivisions maybe in Libya, but very generally you could divide up into the military of the government, Islamist militia groups, and then there are civilian militia groups that are not Islamist, but they were very anti Gaddafi, but after Gaddafi, they were more in line with the military.
Tribal, more in line and tribal and whatever.
Yeah, there's that Michael kind of very over the top Michael Bay movie, 13 Hours, and if you've seen that movie, anyone who's listening, see it. Like, you can hear the soldiers talking with a group that I think they call them 17 Feb, and they would.
That's the exact group I was talking about.
Yeah. So there's like, so they kind of, you can't really tell by just looking at a lot of these characters, but there's the military, there's the civilian militias, and there's Islamist groups. But you're saying like sometimes the people serving in those militias are oftentimes the same people.
Same people, yeah.
that's really confusing.
And
that's a huge clusterfuck.
I can't like blame the Americans, but at the same time, I can blame them for a little bit because we were telling them. I can blame you when I tell you that, hey guys, in 2012, I remember like I had a friend in the United Nations, and I was like, did you know that there is a new group other than Al Qaeda that's growing up in Libya? And he was like, what are you talking about? I was like, there is a terrorist group that's more extreme than Al Qaeda, and that's growing up right now in Derna. And he was like, what are you talking about? There's nothing more extreme than Al Qaeda. And he was like, you'll see. I was talking about the Islamic State in 2012. I've already seen it. Like, it was like, if you go to Derna, there was like a new level of like terrorism where like, there were people up in the mountain where they were like, Al Qaeda were like infiltrating the civilian population. These people were like, no. We're going to separate ourselves. Like, we're going to go up in the mountain, or we're going to set up like an Islamic State up in the mountain. And I was like, oh shit, this is a new level. I remember that. And they were like, they made like Al Qaeda and Ansar Sharia look like amateurs, because they were like, no, we're not going to talk about like reform or whatever. We're going to take over.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think this has a lot to do with the ideology of why Islamic State works differently. It's not just a strategic tactic, but there's a religious reason behind them doing it that way, where they separate themselves and they live in a very Islamic ways. That they're hardcore Salafis that think that you have to live as Muhammad and you have to have an Islamic State today. Like, they don't take the position of the Muslim Brotherhood,
reform,
where we're gonna infiltrate, and we're gonna slowly infiltrate governments and groups, and someday we'll have an Islamic State in a
no, they wanted it now.
It's now. It's today. We all have to be living that right now. So they don't do this. Even the Al Qaeda way of slightly more violent, a lot more violent than obviously than the Muslim Brotherhood, but just flat out living the Salafi life today, right?
Yeah. And even like Al Qaeda was in 2012, they had a really big PR campaign in Libya, where they were like, their campaign in Libya was mainly like, this is Al Qaeda. They were like, we will never kill a Libyan. This is like their biggest advertisement in Libya. Like, even if you want to join Al Qaeda, because they tried to recruit me and a lot of people, but they're like the most important thing. They always like made sure that people know, because Al Qaeda, they had the bad reputation of being terrorists, and they're like the biggest thing they were saying, like, we will never kill a civilian Libyan. We will never kill a Libyan. Even Gaddafi people, even those people, we don't believe that they should be killed. Why? Because we believe that Libyans are Muslim and Libyans are religious by nature. So we will never kill a Libyan. We will never set up a Sharia government or Sharia trial, because we believe that Libyans are capable of doing it themselves. Islamic State, we're not saying that. Islamic State, we're saying, like, we know that Libyans cannot make an Islamic State, and we don't trust them. And we can kill Libyan civilians if you want. So that was like the Al Qaeda and the difference between Al Qaeda and the message between the Al Qaeda and the Islamic State. In 2012, Al Qaeda was like, we're peaceful and we will never kill a Libyan. In 2014, they were like, oh no, we take that back.
From what I understand, a major figure on the side of the military was Khalifa Haftar.
Yes.
What is your opinion of him?
Khalifa Haftar came in 2014 after. So I'll go back to the assassination. Mm-hmm. And after the assassination, they killed the U.S. ambassador. And my activism was, now focused on two things: talking to foreign media and to bringing attention to what's happening in Libya, even though we didn't need it because the international media had paid attention now what happened in Benghazi. But I was trying to focus the narrative where, first of all, I don't want to cause controversy. The biggest lie was the biggest fake news lie was that was about the movie. It was a protest against the movie, and it was a big controversy that the Obama administration said it was a protest against the movie that's on YouTube against Prophet Muhammad. While we all know in Benghazi and within the Obama administration, within the first day, they knew that this was an assassination. This was a terrorist attack set up to kill the American ambassador, and not a protest that went out of hand, So the narrative, I was like, let's tell the truth. It's not a protest. It's not whatever. It's a real terrorist attack. But unfortunately, I was seeing Susan Rice, which is working with the Obama administration, lying on TV and saying it was a protest against the movie. And I was like, I'm living in Benghazi. I literally saw the people attacking. They're not attacking for the movie. They don't know the movie, And the following week, my friends and I, the people who were active in setting up protests against jihadi groups, were okay, now we have an international incident and the whole media is looking at us. Let's do something and talk about this in Libya, in Benghazi. So it was a real big issue. So I had two tasks: to talk to the media, and the second thing is to go to the university, my law school, and take all the brochures and convince every student that I face this week that they must show up for the protest. And that's when I had a life-changing experience, because I just graduated from law, and I had to convince hundreds of people that terrorism doesn't represent Islam, or terrorism is wrong. And I was shocked by people we were debating, and I was like, that killing civilians is wrong. And they were like, okay, killing civilians is wrong, but what if they're infidels? And I'm like, it's wrong too. And they're like, but what about 9/11? And I was like, it's wrong. I had to convince people, hundreds of people, that 9/11 was a terrorist attack and it was wrong, and that killing the American ambassador is also wrong. And I didn't know my people. It was like a shocking day to me, that I didn't know how many people were with that stuff.
Oh, you mean you couldn't recognize your own people? I couldn't. You were shocked by how they were talking?
I couldn't recognize. Yeah, but because a lot of them were justifying what's going on, especially Islamic terrorism, and I was like, wow. I knew that my friends were okay, but I didn't know that the population had this This is a university. These should be like 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds. No, they were like brainwashed with a lot of jihadi ideas, and I had to like, we have a systematic problem. I remember that day I was like, I can't live here. It's impossible for me to be. I can't. So at the same time, I had to set it aside. I was like, I had to focus on my mission. I had to like bring as many people as possible. So in that day, in the protest day, it was September 22, 2012. My friends and I started the protest, and like 50,000 people showed up. It was a massive protest, and we got it covered by CNN on international media, and they were talking about it. And that same day, civilians burned the Ansar Sharia headquarters, and they attacked an Islamist militia headquarters. So it looked like things were gonna be awesome, like following that day. But in that same day, in Benghazi, the head of the government, which was a Libyan American who came back from America, and he was an Islamist, and he literally just came back from the United States, like to pay condolences for Chris Stephen, and he came back to Libya, and he said, like, the Islamist militia you are attacking right now is a legitimate militia. It's under the government. And the people who are attacking this militia have an agenda, and they're pro-Gaddafi, and I give authorization for this militia to protect itself. And this militia killed that day 12 innocent people. And that Libyan American politician, a year later, he left, and he never came back to Libya. And most of his Islamist colleagues are still like in power in Libya and still controlling a lot of Libya. And his son is still running the central bank in Libya, like till this day. Like, this Islamist his son is still running the Libyan central bank, and it's a very messy situation with this group. It's called the Libyan National Salvation Front. The front, of National Salvation, Libya National, and he gave legitimacy to terrorist groups. We know that these people were going to be terrorists, and 2 years later, they actually joined like with Al Qaeda and Islamic State. I'll get to that point. So in 2013, it was a balance between the army, which got like popular support, and it was like Islamic militia who had the government support and the money. And at one time, the government actually gave 1 billion to the one of the extremist militias, like as a severance payment to the fighters who didn't get paid for that year. Like, they literally gave them a lot of money and gave them a lot of like positions in the government. In 2014, people have had enough. Like, in 2013, there was a record number of assassinations. In 2014, the assassinations continue, but the army, now led by Khalifa Haftar, the guy you just mentioned, he led the army against the Islamists. And in 2012, he was aligned with the Islamists, but in 2014, he was like, they're gonna come for me, they're gonna kill me, so I better like set up a plan. And he did. He actually like did something miraculous. With the little army that's left in Benghazi from Gaddafi and the special forces and whoever want to fight and volunteer, they actually defeated Al Qaeda, Ansar Sharia, and Islamic State in the same time. Like, but that came at a really high cost of a war that continued for almost 3 years and basically destroyed half the city. Like, leveled half the city, and like, but at the same time, like, the popular support for Haftar is, I can't deny it. I'm against him, but because in 2015, 2016, the Haftar people were now taking hostages from the Islamic State, and they were executing them Islamic State style. They were actually having the Islamic State fighters wearing orange, and they were executing them from the back with guns and whatever. And I was like, this can't work this way. You have to have a trial. You have to have like a fair civilian government. You can't be against the Islamic State and terrorism and do the exact same thing. And unfortunately, Haftar has been following the same Gaddafi model, and he's supported by foreign governments like United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, and they fund him with billions. And some of his people are committing crimes against humanity, and now they're wanted by the International Criminal Court, actually, because they actually committed crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, a lot of the secular activists fell in the trap where a lot of Egyptians fell, where they supported the army because they were so desperate to fight the Islamists. They supported the army, and they supported the oppressive measures that the army took after, and they didn't stand in the way. I remember in 2015, I started to say, like, how come you're burning the houses of terrorists? Like, their family didn't do anything, you know? The people would, like, if your son was suspected in a terrorist attack or assassination, and they're fighting with Haftar or whatever, they would come and they would take his family out and they would burn their house and they would tell them, like, never come back here, you know? So the reaction was extreme to the other side. And I was like, but now you're creating even more terrorists and even more radicalized children and people. And, like, how can we say, like, we're better than those people and fighting them while we're doing the same exact crimes, you know? So that's why I'm against Haftar, where if you have a principle, you have to stick to it.
Mm. How did you end up leaving Libya? Can you talk about that?
It's not an escape story or whatever.
Uh-huh.
In 2014, I come to the realization where there is a lot of, like, subconscious stuff in my head that were going on, where, like, one of them were like a message where, like, you have to get out of here. You can't like continue here. And because
what were the main reasons in your head going on there?
Yeah,
I kind of want to know.
One of them, I was talking to the media, and I was talking to about what's going on in Libya and about the terrorist group and what terrorism or whatever. And like I said, most of the Islamists are Libyan Americans and Libyan Canadians and Libyan English, British. And they started to pick up on my articles and my views and my social media activity. And they started to report it back to Libyans in Derna and Benghazi. And they were like, get rid of this guy. He's talking about you. And luckily for me, my mom was from Derna, and a lot of my relatives in Derna, even though they were extremists, they're also human beings, and they care about their relatives. And they were, like, calling me, and they were like, "Hey, did you know that your name is on this assassination list? You're now a target. Like, we can stop it for so long, but we can't stop it forever. You need to stop talking, or you need to get out, you know?" And these people were people, like, who are actually extremists, but yeah, they were friendly enough to tell me, like, you need to leave. And I was getting, like, personal threats by then, and from Islamists, from, like, I don't know, I was probably dealing with a lot of, like, PTSD, but, like, one time I went to the, like, Ansar Sharia headquarters myself. Like, I went to it, and I started arguing with them. Why are they here?
Jesus Christ, Bilal.
Yeah.
Man,
and I was live
the
tweeting
balls
it.
you have, man.
I was live tweeting it, actually. I was live
tweeting, going to Ansar al-Sharia.
Yeah. And why are you here?
And just arguing with them.
Yeah, arguing with them.
What were you saying to them?
I was like, why are you kidnapping people? Because they were telling me because they drink alcohol. And I'm like, but you can't kidnap people. You're not with the government. And they're like, yeah, but Allah said so. And Allah, like, aren't you a Muslim? And I'm like, back then I was like, yeah, but you can't force stuff on people. And they were like, we can. And I'm like, okay. I tried. Like, I tried to be like really nice. I tried to justify them. I tried to be like, there are some good people in Ansar Sharia, but there are bad people there. I tried to like be friendly. I tried to do anything, you know. I was desperate to like understand what's going on, you know. Like I remember like the time up until like 2011, I was a conspiracy theorist that like I had my doubts about 9/11 and what happened that day, and I was like one of those people who were watching the videos. Look at that, man! There's demolition there, man. And I was like, but in 2011, I remember like meeting like in Derna, and like people were like, "Bro, we were at Afghanistan then. We were happy, and like we actually were like knew about this stuff. Like, what are you talking about? Are you serious? Are you gonna take credit from us and say the American government did it?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So it is real," you know. So that's one of the things. Like,
Yeah, I've seen that happen before. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was giving a speech at the United Nations, and he was talking, conspiracy theories about 9/11 and how the Jews weren't in the buildings and et cetera, et cetera. And then I think it was the next day, Al Qaeda was giving all kinds of declarations on YouTube, denouncing Ahmadinejad is like, no, we did it. Why are you taking credit from us and giving it to other Americans? Like they didn't want that. They didn't like that conspiracy theory.
Exactly.
It take away their glory of that from it. So
I remember that. Like I had the same exact thing. I was like, "Are you serious? Like you support this stuff?" And they were like, "Yeah, bro. We were like in Darna, and we were in Afghanistan, and we were like, some of them were like working with Bin Laden. We know a lot of people in Darna that were like connected to like the terrorist groups in Afghanistan." So I was like, "Oh, okay, it's real." So that was in 2011. But yeah, and
then from there,
sorry, where was I?
Leaving to.
Yeah, so and in 2014, I had planned to leave to Europe, not on a boat, but I had a visa. But yeah, I was planning on to leave to Europe, but I got a chance to come to Canada. And at first, I was planning on like staying for a few months, and then while I was here, one of my closest friends got killed, an activist who was part of the protests that I told you about following the killing the American ambassador. But he was a lot more active than me, and he was a lot more famous than me in public. And yeah, he got killed in 2014. And a colleague of mine, a fellow lawyer, she got killed as well, a prominent lawyer, a human rights activist, while I was in Canada. So it was like, now they're done with the military, with the army, and now they're at the point where they're killing like straight up women, children, because the guy who I told you about was 18 years old. He was just barely got 18 years old. And the woman I told you about is 46-year-old lawyer. So she's not a threat. So they started to kill like civilians, activists. And I was like, I have to stay here. So I applied here and I got my status here. And yeah.
Can I, God, there's so much. I'd like to talk to you another like 2 hours about just religion. But I think it'd be better if we just do a different podcast for that. But I would like to ask you, because I still hear to this day from political commenters who lean very left, very anti-American in many cases, and they're very especially anti-American intervention. To this day, I'm still seeing them use Libya as an example, added on with Iraq and the invasion of Iraq, to say, well, look what happened after the United States intervened and took out Gaddafi, and Gaddafi was he might have been bad, but he was a secular leader, and yes, he was going to attack these cities and kill the rebels, but now then it was taken over by ISIS and the situation is worse. What would you say to that general message? What would your response be to any of these people making that comment?
To be honest, um, I've been talking to liberals and left and right wing, because we have a lot of right wing focus on Libya and Benghazi. For some reason, right wingers love Benghazi and conservatives because they talk about the controversy. So they learned actually about what happened in the intervention. So we have both like left leaning and right leaning conservatives who are like, look at what happened in Libya. Look at what's going on in Libya. Well, I don't talk to them. I honestly don't send them a message anymore. I talk to my own people in Libya. I focus on the people who can save things and who can make things better, because I truly believe America cannot make things better in Libya.
Mm-hmm.
America can make it worse with whatever they can do. Like they can mess up, but they cannot make things better. Only Libyans can do that. And so to them, I can say, like, give us enough respect to let us solve our own issues and bullshit. Don't stick up for us. Let Libyans take responsibility of what's going on in Libya. That's what I would say to them. Don't Libyans, Iraqis, they don't deserve what's going on to them, but they should take responsibility of what's going on to them. Not as individuals, as a group, but also as individuals. And that's what also I always say about Libya. We have a small Gaddafi living inside each and every one of us. Seculars, Islamists, whoever, people want to silence their critics with violence and with military means and with whatever they can do, but they don't want to talk. And to them, like, I want to say, like, Libyans, they need to learn how to talk. They need to learn how to criticize bad ideas, including religious ideas and cultural ideas, and talk about our history. About, like, for example, in Libya, we cannot talk about Omar Mukhtar. We cannot say that he was an Islamist and he was a jihadi, and we'll have like a little bit of criticism because he's still on the currency, and he's considered the #1 national hero, the symbol of Libya and being a Libyan. And till this day, when Libyan terrorists kill each other, kill themselves or bomb themselves, they say, like, we're doing this to tribute for Omar Mukhtar, our grandfather, the guy who gave us this legacy. We need to carry it on. And I'm like, okay, how about we confront this legacy and talk about it honestly? But Americans or liberals or conservatives in America, something that somebody never told them. I don't care what you think. I don't care what they think. I don't care what they've. At 2012, at 2016, I was angry enough to say, like, don't vote for Hillary. She was the State Department, Secretary of the State Department while Benghazi attack happened, so she's not competent or whatever. But I was like, but what other choice do they have? They have Trump. That's not a choice. That's like they're both as bad as each other. So whoever they choose is like just going to be bad. So I don't care what they think anymore. If you're somebody who cares about Libyans, give them enough respect, and Iraqis, give them enough respect to take responsibility to take what's happening to their country. Don't take that away from them. Make them take responsibility. Don't say, like, America ruined your country. Like, we ruined it too. Like, don't take our credit in what happened, and Gaddafi's credit or Libya's legacy. It's a horrible thing that happened, and Libyans need to share responsibility for it.
Yeah. So I hear a similar thing when I hear about Chile and the golpe de Estado, the coup by Pinochet over Salvador Allende. And when every year when the topic pops up again, because they kind of circumvent 9/11 happening in the United States with 9/11 in Chile, because the coup happened on also September 11th, and I constantly hear in the United States, see these little, from left-wing websites and news agencies, they'll always paint it like America did it completely, taking all responsibility away from Chileans. And yes, the United States was definitely involved. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy reality. It completely is true and happened, but it doesn't take away the fact, like, that was a real division between
Exactly.
communists and capitalists in the country and different political parties, and Chileans were the ones who did it. There wasn't any American soldiers. They didn't invade this country. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I completely see that. I get that same kind of sensation that I think you're talking about now, where you can't take complete, like, we're not automatons. We're not robots that just do whatever the American imperialists tell us. Like, we have our own problems, we have our own divisions, and we make our own decisions, and we make bad
Yeah.
decisions often. But do you speak, going back to Libya? Do you think I'm naive if I think that I'm actually, despite all the divisions and all the violence you told me, going back to the time of the 90s that you were talking about, where you said there was no connection, there was no Pepsi Cola, there was no, the political understanding was reduced to the green book that Gaddafi had written. Do you think I'm naive
Hmm.
in thinking I'm still optimistic because even your generation grew up so isolated, but when there's so much potential to open up, there's resources that you just need the spark of modernity and information and the idea of civil rights. Do you think there's actually a lot of hope in that just the opening up to the world can create change?
By nature, I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when it comes to Libya, I'm not. Um,
Do you think it
I'm a,
just
I'm
take
a
a
big
really long time? What I'm talking
I'm a
about?
big fan of Sam Harris,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things Sam Harris said, that you can develop a nuclear bomb without looking at your religion. That you're looking at, like, you can go in that path of science where you can go all the way to developing a nuclear bomb, or like even have it like a research about evolution and not lose your religion, because that's how strong religion is. In Libya, we have such a strong, deep rooted religious culture that nothing. I have this pinned as my Arabic tweet, but I have, like, you can see it. Nothing. Women's right, elections, reconciliation, economic reform. Nothing can help Libya until they can honestly speak about the main issue in Libya: religion, which is religion and culture. Like, I can say culture as well. Like, we have cultural issues that unrelated to religion, where I can say, like, this is the Libyan, unrelated to Islam, but we have a real issue with theology in Libya. We have with being people like the population being an Islamic population, and a hypocritical population, because they would vote for an Islamic state, but they wouldn't want to be living in one, which is like a very huge issue. And the biggest problem is you can't talk about it. If I go back and say this stuff, I would be killed, by not just by terrorists, by normal civilians, by my own, not family, but my own people, like my own close circle would kill me, would literally kill me if I say, like, let's talk honestly about religion. Let's criticize it. Let's criticize bad ideas, and I don't want it to be enforced. I don't want it to be in the law. I don't want it to be mentioned. I don't want it. I don't want it in my life. And when people say, like, do you want a secular state? And I go, yeah, that's a death sentence. So as long as this remains a death sentence for people like me, there will never be a peaceful transition to a modern civil state in Libya. There will never be that. Like, unfortunately, it's not me. It's me being realistic. As long as we cannot criticize bad ideas, we will never move forward in Libya. And so far, you cannot.
It's really amazing. You just almost said a phrase almost verbatim of a previous guest, Mohammed Al-Qadra. He's from Jordan. He was also very fundamentalist at a time and now not. He said the exact same thing you just said, that Jordanians would all vote to live in an Islamic state but don't want to live in one.
Yeah,
And you
and
just
that's a
said that
common
about
thing.
Libya. That's very interesting. You guys pretty much said the exact same thing about your countries. There's
Yeah,
there's
and
there's a
that's a
lot to
common
talk about
thing.
there.
Yeah, that's a common thing in Libya, that Libyans would go to for treatment, or for tourism to Tunisia. which is next to Libya, but they wouldn't have a spa set up in Libya. They wouldn't take it. They wouldn't allow women to wear bikini in Libya, but Libyan women would go to wear bikini in Tunisia. It's a very strange dichotomy in Libya, but at the same time, it's like you cannot talk about it. Honestly, you cannot set up a TV show or a radio show or a popular internet YouTube channel and go with your face and talk about this stuff. Like last year, during Ramadan, I tweeted a joke about buying a new telescope, and I said I bought a new telescope, and I'm gonna use it to look for for like the moon and Jupiter, but I'm not gonna use it for Islamic observing of the moon, of the hilal, of the Ramadan. That tweet was screenshotted, and people said like this is the number one, number two trending hashtag in Libya. Bilal is an atheist, outing me as an atheist, attacking my family, threatening my life, and all because I said I bought a telescope and I'm not going to use it for religious purposes. That's literally it. And that got me, like, if I was in Libya, I would have probably been dead for that. Because people were like, who is this guy? Where can we find him? And how can we kill him? Because he said that. Another time, like, they take another screenshot and they would just, like, every single day, every single time, like, get death threats constantly online. Not just death threats, but just, like, threats where, like, where are you? Where can we find you in Libya and kill you right now? Like, are you in Libya? Are you serious? Like, that's how they talk to me. Like, how dare you talk like that? Like, you're a Libyan, you're a Muslim. Talk in a Muslim way. Like, I'm not. Don't tell me what to say. But yeah, it's one of those like things where like, if I can't say that, if I can't criticize them openly, how can I do anything? How can you expect any reform or anything that can happen? Because even the Haftar people are threatening me as well. Like, hey, don't talk about Haftar. Like, I'm getting threats in Libya. Don't talk about Haftar. Like, that's how bad it is. Yeah.
I mean, we've almost been speaking for 2 hours. I want to ask you a million things about religion. Let's talk again. It's been amazing. It's been great to talk to you. Libya is a small country, but it's very significant, I think, politically, and it's a country that stands out a lot for its history and its people.
Yeah, it does.
But thank you for being on again, man.
Thank you for having me.